I guess what I've set up is that we have seen this huge transformation of drawing since the 60s and 70s, and with the setting up of institutions like a drawing centre, and with drawing finding itself at the heart of institutions like MIMA through scholars like Catherine de Zager and Connie Butler, and then it being rolled out and I guess finding a new place in the world in 2011. And I was struck, or I am struck, I guess, by the work of both of the artists with us this evening, Ruth and Rachel, because whilst to some observers they may seem very similar, but I guess from my perspective they seem quite different, and also they set up a kind of there's almost an antagonism between the different routes that these practices are taking. And I wondered, to start, if either of you would like to speak a little bit more about your work, and perhaps under the umbrella of drawing.
You want to start?
I mean, most recently I have become really interested in the idea of expanded drawing, because this year I have seen my drawings actually move out into small-scale ceramic sculptures and animations. So it's also using the space as I would do a sheet of paper. And I mean, what I get from Ruth's work is kind of really sort of quite contained worlds.
It's about material for me, and so they came about because I was really interested in the way that there are these images and these kind of souvenirs and these things that you take away from. You go to a museum, you see these paintings, you buy your postcard, you take it away, you put it on your fridge, you keep it forever, and they become these kind of stand-in objects that are material, but nothing of the original, nothing of this original thing. But we just kind of accept this image as being a substitute. And so I think what I kind of got interested in is making it material again. So making you think perhaps again about what you're looking at. Yes. Actually, and that you are looking at an image and you're looking at a surface and you're looking at a picture of something.
Mm-hmm. And from time to time I have the impression that you are showing what lays beneath the surface. For example, there's a postcard showing father and son, and you've connected them by connecting the eyes of the father and the son, and so in a certain way you are interpreting these all artworks in your personal way, and this is what I like on that work.
I mean, I started I've made a lot of work at big sculptural installations that mix abstract and figurative elements. So I have used and still do to a certain extent a lot of ceramic figurines. These kind of figurative objects that kind of lull you into thinking you know what you're looking at, and that you think you're looking at a narrative, and that they're the important things, I suppose. And the interesting thing about those figurines is they're called conversation pieces. They're made to communicate. That's their function. They would go on your table in your fancy house when you had your guests around. You would have that in the middle of the table, and you would communicate through it. And so I think the interesting thing about, I always choose paintings that have that there is a gaze, and it may be that the sitter is looking at you and they're engaging you, or it may be that there's a relationship that's built up by this kind of, I'm looking at you now, I'm talking to you, those kind of behavioural things that are incredibly human, I suppose, which, to a certain extent goes back to technology, in that it's those kind of moments where you communicate physically or, through engaging with another human being are things that I'm quite interested in how that shifts and how that alters now that, the vast majority of my communication is through Twitter or email, and actually what those kind of moments are.
And of course the characters that we're so familiar with in your drawings, which are also interestingly often masked or hooded or covered in some way, and the gaze is the viewer is, we're not allowed in some instances to see who that individual is?
Well, I mean, you'll never find any character in my work that you can actually like make eye contact with. So I'll either mask them, or they'll have the back to you, or if their eyes are showing, they have no pupils in them. So that's always been a really important part, an important thread that's run through the work. If they kind of can't communicate by actually, well, there's no visual communication, so they're kind of often quite clumsily finding other ways of communicating or other ways of trying to connect with each other. And a lot of my work, a lot of the ideas within the work is to do with like these boundaries and kind of crossing boundaries, or kind of just trying to find new boundaries of how to connect.
Have you seen or have you identified a kind of change in how we talk or don't talk about drawing? Or
Well, what I've seen, of course, is that the possibilities of what we understand under the word drawing have been enlarged enormously in the last years. For example, Katharina Hinsberg, it's a German artist. She made a kind of drawing existing only in space and time, because it was a kind of installation, and you had a room like this, and in the ceiling there was a hole, and each day at noon someone threw a stripe of thin paper through that hole, and it moved down, and you had the impression of having a really fine line, a really fine drawing, but only in the moment when it falls down, and afterwards it's finished. It was, and that was the concept of Katharina, making drawings. Of course, also a bit by accident, because you can't foresee how these lines will move. But she wanted to have drawings existing only for just a short second.
I suppose it's quite interesting in relation to kind of traditional notions of drawing as this preparatory thing.
Well, yeah. And to be honest, I mean, that's what really attracted me to drawing in the first place. Because when I was at a university, like 11 years ago now, I was actually doing sculpture, but kept my drawings really private. Because as well as like the course that I did, and the time it was, there wasn't really that those conversations about drawing had only just started, so there wasn't really that, nobody was like noticing all these drawings that were mounting from my studio and actually saying, have you thought about actually exploring the drawings as, as your primary kind of medium? It was never really something that was really, well, it wasn't really discussed at the time, to be honest. And so I was actually kind of like really attracted to drawing when I first graduated, because it was the thing that was most important to me, but I'd always like considered the underdog. Well, it always had been considered the underdog.
So how do you think you've extended them into sculpture now, which is kind of what you said?
What I was wanting to do with the sculptures was I started to kind of want to explore what would happen if I kind of took an image out of the paper and kind of started to play around with introducing notions of like space. And I'd started to imagine them as almost being like a jellyfish out of water, so it started to like lose its shape a little bit, or kind of wouldn't be able to hold its own weight. And some of the pieces that I made in my most recent show were little sculptures kind of sitting on top of drawings that were drawn directly into the plinth. So I suddenly had I had 5 sides to play with, and an idea of being able to walk around. But so I kind of call them sculptures, but I do actually think of them more as like sculptural drawings. So it's part of the same language.
And I guess that rupture that you're creating, which is making manifest something that was 2 dimensions into 3 dimensions. So you're ripping it out of one particular plane and you're introducing it into another plane.
Yeah.
I'm just